Mr. Jaswant Singh, thank you very much for speaking to us. So let me start with a statement that you made recently. I mean, you talked about the need for a generational change in politics and I'm assuming amongst politicians as well. What were you thinking of when you said that?
I was thinking of a transformation, because I think the country today confronts a situation really of a perilous, which I don't overstate the problem when I say perilous. It is perilous in all spheres of national existence: economy, security, internal, external, the state of the armed forces, and also the state of our foreign policy. Now, there is a generational change required, which is not just a physical age-related change. It is a change of concepts and perceptions. And how India has suddenly, in the last 10 years, fallen in global esteem. And it is because India has fallen in global esteem, it is because of that the youth of India no longer find anything inspirational. The political leadership is not for acquisition of office. There is a great deal of difference between power and merely holding office. I don't think the present government has any power. It is, of course, occupying offices. I can't say it's occupying them for the last 10 years with any sense of distinction.
Right. So you talked about a change in concepts, right? When you said generational change, that the approach needs to be different. Can you give us an example?
Yes, of course. It has to be more inspirational. Okay. See, if like the Prime Minister once or twice mentioned, when I held finance ministry's responsibility, I'm not an economist, and I don't believe the challenge in managing the economy of the country size of India, it is really a political economy that you have to manage. And the Prime Minister spoke of animal spirits. I remember, I don't want to engage in any self-aggrandizement, but I remember saying exactly this. But then I just didn't say it. There was a period of bounding animal spirits in the country's investors, those that came from outside. And Indian investors then, with all confidence, flooded the markets abroad, acquired assets. And I had told them in a meeting in Bombay, go and conquer the world, we will stand by you. The government's job is not to inhibit the creative elements of the country. It is to promote them, to encourage them. The government is not merely a retardant, it should be an accelerator. So all this is really this is the first reform that is needed. The reform of the mindset of the government, the reform of the mindset of the administrators. That's what I meant by transformation.
So how does the youth see this? I mean, and really this is what we are trying to address here. You know, how do politicians from your generation think of young India, and how does young India feel confident that you are indeed thinking of them?
Well, it can only be by example. It's no good just talking about it. I have had the honor and responsibility of handling a number of these, what I can only call them responsibilities. And it was always my endeavor and it remains my endeavor, that you have to inspire confidence. You cannot command confidence. And then the confidence can be inspired only by example. The young in India, the young of India, young Indians want to do things, not simply in obtaining a job, but they want to participate in the great experiment that is India. The great experiment, the growth of India, the development of India finding its rightful place in the global community of countries. Are we at the rightful place? Do young Indians aspire to that place? It is to give a direction to that aspiration. And unless the youth of India is not as inspired as I have found them, for example, in my public life. I was not there, of course, when, but I was awake enough in 47 to recognize that the country was transforming. A great fervor pervaded the entire country. We were not part of British India, but even we sensed that a great transformation was taking place. And when has that again happened? It happened in 62, even though 62, and I was in the northeast then, even though 62 was a very humiliating reverse, but the country was galvanized. 65, same thing happened. Why is it that such galvanizing of the country should take place only when you are confronted by an armed attack or something like that? We were not galvanized, for example, when we sent troops via IPKF to Sri Lanka. So what has gone wrong? The leadership quotient, in which inspirational is a great element, that is absent. It's routine drudgery that is now replaced. I am appalled at what we face in Parliament on a daily basis. Parliament is no longer an example that the young can or want to follow.
But would you say an entire generation of leaders to that extent has failed this country?
Well, I can't claim success. I don't think the entire generation has failed. I don't want to be partisan in what I say, but I certainly do think that the collectivity of us, both in government and those who are not in government, have to share this responsibility. We have somehow, in some peculiar manner, the alchemy of failure covers all of us. Somewhere our responsibility is there. It's an old saying, a truism. The government must have its way, but the opposition must have its say. Now, if this is what Parliament must, then the opposition has to have its say.
But do you see the nature of the debate changing or shifting?
Yes.
For instance, I was reading an interview that you gave to Rajasthan Patrika, and I think you were deliberately focusing on local issues, but you said that you would look at providing jobs, water, a railway station halt, which seems very provincial, if I may say so.
Yes, it is, because it is provincial. The question was focused on what would you do if you are elected from that constituency. It's my home, that's where I was born. I know the problems that confront that, and the question was directed at that. And of course in the desert, water is a great problem. We are next door to Sindh, so the railway connection is of great importance. In that fashion, it was provincial. But that does not mean that my concerns cover only the provincial.
So could you give us a sense then of what would be your primary concerns today? I think you outlined you said that there were things that were wrong with the country today. You talked about the forces, you talked about the economy, but what would you
I think the primary concern is, the very first concern is the absence of governance. I have often said in Parliament, there's a very fine word, it's a Persian word, but it's untranslatable. I have to say it in Hindi, I'm afraid. Sure. This government has lost its Iqbal. Iqbal is moral authority. And if you don't have moral authority, you can't govern. Therefore, the first requirement that the country needs is governance. But governance is not collecting every authority in your lap and not doing anything. Therefore, it amounts to better governance and less governing, less government.
Okay.
More governing but less government.
Right. Let me pick one area that you speak often about and connect it to, and see if we can connect it to the aspirations of young India. And let's talk about the defense forces. the defense forces have been in the news of late for mostly the wrong reasons. We've had a general of the army resigning under a cloud. And the question that I would ask is, are we seeing the right examples being set? And are we also creating the right environment for young people to join in a situation where clearly the future looks bleak when it comes to, let's say, equipping the army, funding the army sufficiently, giving them the latest equipment and so on?
It's a very serious question you ask, and it seriously troubles me. I won't go into examples of former chiefs of staff and what they've done or not done, but it's a very sad reality that in this UPA government's tenure, we've had an Air Chief Marshal and the Chief of Staff of the Army and the Chief of Staff of the Navy. The Chief of Staff of the Navy has had to resign. The Chief of Staff, a former Chief of Staff of the Air Force, has been charged with malfeasance of funds, and a former Army Chief has had the problem of going into contention with his own government. This does not speak well of any of us if the situation is. The state of the armed forces is a matter of very great peril. I underscore this word, is a matter of very great peril to the country. The morale of the armed forces is low, their equipment state is abysmal, their responses are not addressed properly, they are no longer a part of the pay commission, which they ought to be. So whether it is on the front of pensions, pay commission, morale, equipment, leadership, and civilian leadership is not controlled by the bureaucracy. It's political direction that have to be given. In all these matters, the government does not provide the necessary support and direction to the services.
But this is also a steady deterioration. I mean, it's not
Of
something
course
that
it
happened.
is. Yes, you can say steady deterioration, I accept that. I've had the benefit of working in the Defence Ministry. It is in the Defence Ministry that I remember we produced a paper, and this is 2001, I think, I've forgotten when. In 2001 we produced a paper about the state of the Indian Air Force and what we will need within the next 5 years. And that is where, if I remember right, we had placed a need for about 140 aircraft. They were reduced to 126. Those 126 are still to be obtained 11, 12 years later.
So who's to blame?
What?
Who's to blame?
Oh, government, of course, government. Clearly, decision making is so tardy, it drags. I'm sorry to have to say this, but the present Minister of Defence, Honorable Mr. Anthony, whom I've known for many years, he specializes in not confirming an order, taking inordinately long for taking a decision, and if any complaint comes, straight away handing it over to the CBI, and thereafter cancelling the order and blacklisting the manufacturer. We must be world champions in blacklisting armament manufacturers, with the result that we now have a situation.
But maybe he's also discovering or highlighting the nature of these deals, which sometimes are dodgy.
Take it that they are dodgy. Find an answer. Don't cancel the deal and blacklist the manufacturer, with the result that India is left out of options of acquiring arms. Take 155 millimeter howitzer. We have blacklisted all those who could possibly supply us, and indigenously we don't manufacture them. So I'm afraid I'm not able to convince myself in what you say that maybe he's doing well. He's not doing well if he condemns India to a state of lack of preparedness.
What would you do if you were to become defense minister again? And let me put this in two ways. One is the army as an organization that's running, right, which includes all the operating issues and the equipment and the arms and so on. The second is fresh blood, right? How do you convince young people today that this is an institution that you should work for? Because all this actually would convince someone to not come there and rather stay away.
No, I think it's become more a situation of conditions of service in the armed forces and the pay and allowances that they are entitled, including pension and subsequently. India is not the sort of country that has to have compulsory military service, though the NCC, etc., are an attempt at that. But I do think the young would be attracted if the terms of engagement in the armed forces were such as would take them away from other occupations. This has been a problem for very long now. I was commissioned, I feel I'm ancient. I was commissioned in the Indian Army in 1957. So that's a long time ago. And I compared the army to which I belonged, because I resigned my commission in 66, in 9-year service. I'm not a pensioner. But the army that I was a part of was a proud army. We were greatly hurt in our loss in 62. We were not greatly enervated by what we achieved and then lost in 65. And 66, end of 66, I resigned. I won't go into all that.
Because the question still is, I mean, how do you restore that glory? I mean, would you join the army today if you had
I encourage my sons, I have 2 sons, 2 children. I encourage my sons to join the army. One of them is in the army, he's a territorial army officer. I encourage them to. My other son was found colorblind and sadly couldn't go there. But they should. It's very good for a young man to hear the bullets whiz past his ears. It's a very noble profession. It's a calling. It's not a money-making job. You cannot inspire the young only on grounds of money. The calling has to be addressed with respect. Look at the respect that we have not diminished alone. We have almost denuded the armed forces of respect that they earlier had in the civil service. And we continuously make deliberate efforts to push them lower and lower, even in small matters like the protocol matters.
See, if I'm a young Indian and I would ask you as an older Indian, what are you doing to ensure that the army is brought back into some shape so that I feel safe and secure as a citizen of India?
At the moment we are doing nothing, absolutely nothing. If there are 2 or 3 things you have to do, you have to first of all appoint a commission which is appointed by the Parliament and reports back to the Parliament to assess all the complaints and difficulties and shortages that the armed forces are experiencing and comes up with suggestions.
But commissions also sound like a one-way path to
No,
nowhere.
it is not. It is not. Like the United States of America recognizing the difficulty that the armed forces are facing, and they've been in one conflict or another continuously now for almost 20 years. If they felt the need to appoint a commission, which is a parliamentary appointed commission, to go into what the situation in the armed forces is and to suggest reforms, which reforms must then be in the form of an enactment of Parliament. It's no good just having recommendations. Soon after Kargil, for example, the NDA government, and I had something to do with the defense even then, ordered a review of the Kargil conflict. Based on that review, then we ordered further examination of the faults that were found. Then we produced a review, a whole catalogue of recommendations.
Right. So you said commission is one, a commission that actively leads to a change in parliamentary
legislation
yeah.
of accepted recommendations. And those legislation must then become part of the statute book.
So that's one.
Yes, that at least now, more than 60 years down the line of independence, have a memorial to the armed forces, not a single memorial to IPK. But that's an isolated thing. Thirdly, do address all these salary and wages difficulties of other ranks, officers, JCOs, all that. And fourthly, you must give them the prestige that was their due, that is their due in civil society.
Can you elaborate on that? I mean,
Prestige, that is...
prestige, the word is amorphous. I mean, what could it actually mean?
It could mean that when you have this... you prepare, the Ministry of Home Affairs prepares a list. In this list, they say this person sits at number 1, 2, 3,
Okay.
like that. And the army and the 3 chiefs have been continuously pushed downwards. And they now come after cabinet secretary. It's a wounding demotion.
So that's your specific, okay.
It's a wounding demotion. Please address the salary and wages and pensions problems. One rank, one pension has been going on for so long. Is the present announcement an answer
On
to
pension.
Is it? It's not an answer. It's almost a slay of hand. I don't want to go into the details of how it is a slay of hand. There is a 7th pay commission. Up till the 4th pay commission, soldiers were part, soldiers say, some ex-servicemen was part of this pay commission. And it also considered the salary and wages of the armed forces. Now it's out, they are not there. So appoint a pay commission which is only for soldiers,
Right.
sailors and airmen, including
So you
the
said, so commission which leads to change in legislation,
Yes.
restore prestige, which as you defined, I mean the hierarchical part, the pension and the pensions of soldiers, so that people who were to join tomorrow get a sense of security down the line. So you feel that these 3 things would broadly address the
I introduced,
concerns.
I must, because the list is not confined to
Sure.
3.
But these are the key ones.
I think also health. We established almost 376 polyclinics through ECHS, ex-servicemen's contributory health scheme. It is so beneficial to the armed forces to look after their medical conditions after retirement. And in districts there are no
Right.
hospitals, plus housing. We put up 300,000 housing. It took some time to do it, but at least now there are more.
But the X factor seems to be missing. I mean, so this is the institutional
The
framework.
X factor is inspirational.
Yeah.
The inspirational bit, sadly today in Parliament, both houses of Parliament, which is 800 plus, I don't boast, but I'm the only ex-serviceman in the houses, the only Indian to have had the great honor and benefit of having served the Indian Army.
Okay.
Why is it that no one in the Parliament today represents in any sense the voice of the armed forces?
Right. So maybe that's a call to people in the army, and you're seeing some who've already shown an inclination to move. Last question: if you were to do one thing differently at the time that you could have done it, what would it be?
Oh, I would reform the whole manner of conducting our foreign affairs, because it's sagging. It's as if, I hate to say it, but we had a Minister of External Affairs who, participating in a debate or intervention in the UN General Assembly, was so absent-minded that instead of reading his speech, he started reading out the speech of the Foreign Minister of Brazil. Now, we don't want that kind of representation. I don't want to say anything much about the present Minister of External Affairs. He's a very affable man, but he's not a very able man. Now, you cannot waffle your way through the world.
So what would you, the question was, what is the one thing that you would have done differently when you could have done?
No, you must think. There must be proper formulation of foreign policy. And I would certainly not have worked towards the situation in which almost the entire neighborhood, immediate neighborhood of India is an adversarial situation with India. India cannot have its immediate neighborhood in a contentious mood all along, everywhere. Then you are shackling our own feet. You cannot then assert India's presence in the Committee of Global Affairs with the kind of strength and conviction that India must have. There is we seem to be now addressing questions of foreign policy in a sleepwalking stage. Occasionally we remember something, and it's a matter of total routine that the Prime Minister is attending the international conferences. At times I think he is doing so to escape India, so that he goes and...
So you're saying the one thing that you would have done is put more power into the foreign and external
power
affairs.
Power is a strange word.
Yeah, power I don't mean in the sense of control, but more weight and perhaps width.
Thought and delivery and assertion of India's interests.
And that's missing.
I am afraid it is. You discovered it for me and show me where it is. I don't have to comment. It's the events and the situation which is commenting on India by itself. Afghanistan is going through a turmoil, so is Pakistan. We have a situation with Bangladesh which we have never had earlier. Nepal of all countries, Sri Lanka, the situation. Which interest of India are we subserving? In what fashion?
Mr. Jaswant Singh, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.